Hello, let's see if this works. However many times one tries before the session, it still may not work, but we'll eventually figure it out. So, hi, I am Gábor Hojtsy, and this is the state of Drupal 9. And an interesting fact about this session is that this session is open source. Anybody can take the slides, you can edit them further, you can add more slides, you can remove slides, you can translate the slides, and you can present them at your own camp. I don't know if Miro is in the audience. He presented this in Slovakia before as a keynote. Last week, Amber from Lullabot presented it at Drupal GovCon in the US. So this has been a traveling slideshow. So I created this in an open source form so anybody can present it anywhere. And I am Gábor Hojtsy. I'm a Drupaler since 2003. I've been an Acquian since 2007, so basically forever. I've been the Drupal 6 release manager and the Drupal 8 multilingual initiative lead. And I'm here because I'm currently an initiative coordinator in Drupal core. And one of my primary things that I'm trying to coordinate is Drupal 9. Among some other things that are also interesting. So Drupal 9 is kind of an interesting thing because historically people would expect a lot from a new release like Drupal 9 and a lot of new features and nice new shiny things, and in this case it's not going to happen. So I will spoil that surprise for you from the start, and so we should talk about how those new shiny things get into Drupal in the first place. So let's talk about how Drupal innovates, because Drupal 9 is not how Drupal innovates. With the Drupal 8 release, there's been 3 new things that we've introduced in Drupal, 3 new processes or practices. The first is semantic versioning, which allows us to have 3 components in the version number, a major component, a minor component, and a patch component. And that does not sound in itself very exciting. It's a technical detail. But what it allows us to do is to release new feature updates in what's called minor releases, with incrementing the second number, 8.1, 8.2, etc., and release new features in a backwards compatible way that still works with 8. We have not done this entirely perfectly in the past, but we've been improving with keeping backwards compatibility in more and more releases. So we've introduced this so we can release new features in much more often than major releases. And then we've also decided to schedule these releases. So twice a year, we release a new minor version. That's usually in the summer and in the summer, June, July, and in the winter around November, December. And that's because we wanted to have a cadence that people can expect. If they work on something that gets into Drupal core, it will be released in a few months. If they are not done with what they worked on, it will not be on the shelf for 3 years, but it will be released in the next release in maybe 7 or 8 months. So this helps users know what they can anticipate and when they need to plan updates. And this also helps contributors to plan with their contribution and to know that if they contribute something, it will be released in a timely fashion. It will not wait for several years on the shelf, sitting there, maybe released in 3 or 4 years. But there are still things that are just not possible to develop in 3 or 4 months to be released in the next release. So for that, we decided to add the concept of experimental modules, which is basically releasing things in Drupal core that are not stable yet. They are not done yet. We still need to improve them. Maybe they are not performant enough, or maybe the accessibility has some to be desired. Or maybe there are feature gaps that we have not yet implemented. So this is the area that we use experimental modules for. So we can release features that are not yet done, but we get feedback on them even before they are done. We can improve them, and they can get stable in a fashion that people expect them to work. So developers get feedback sooner, and users understand what's coming up in the future much better. So these 3 improvements allowed us to do a bunch of great things. In 8.6.0, It allowed us to release a media library and an experimental module that allows you to visually see media that you can reuse on your site. It allows us to release the workspaces module in experimental, which allows you to stage a set of things together in one set. And it allows us to stabilize the previously experimental demo profile, which allows people to try out Drupal core very easily in a food magazine scenario. And it also allowed us to stabilize monolingual migrations, even while we kept multilingual migrations experimental. So this allowed us to move within the 8 release and add new features and build new experimental capabilities that we are not done with yet. And 8.7.0 went even further. So here we improved the media library a great deal, but we are not yet stable. We did stabilize the layout builder that was there and experimental before. And we've added the JSON API module, brand new, stable, into core. And we made Drupal core optionally compatible with Twig 2 if you patch your composer files. So there's a bunch of technical limitations that does not allow us to make it easy to optionally support Twig 2 in core, but all of the PHP APIs that we use are optionally compatible with Twig 2 now, so we are getting ready to update to Twig 2 in Drupal 9. And in 8.8, we are still working on improving the media library. We hopefully get that to stable. We work on improvements to layouts and workspaces. We may be getting workspaces to stable, but we will not rush that if that's not possible. So we can still continue innovating in 8 and do a bunch of new nice things. And it will be backwards compatible with all the 8 releases before. So the question is, if we can do all of these nice things, people get backwards compatible new features, they are predictable twice a year, then why not keep going with Drupal 8? So we could keep going however long we want on 8, right? Would that be nice? I guess. Unfortunately, that is not possible to do. We need to do Drupal 9. And that's the main reason that we need to do Drupal 9 is because we stepped off our island. And we are working with a bunch of other open source communities. We are not owning our full of our own code base anymore. We use a lot of third-party libraries that help us a lot, that we don't need to build all of the code base ourselves. We can innovate with other communities in the PHP space. But it also means that we need to sync up with their release schedules, and we need to keep their release schedules in mind. So basically, there's 2 reasons to do Drupal 9. The first is we need to update third-party dependencies, because some of our dependencies will go unsupported or possibly insecure soonish. And the other reason that is kind of our own reason for ourselves is to clean up our own code base of things that are not relevant anymore, that are outdated, that are not useful or not up to date in terms of the technology of today. But the primary driver of the release timeline is updating third-party dependencies. So let's see some of these third-party dependencies that we depend on. There's a lot of them. So if you go to drupal.org/core/dependencies, there's a lot of dependencies that Drupal core depends on. These are the biggest ones: Symfony, jQuery and jQuery UI, Ceditor 4, and Twig 1. So for Symfony, we work with Symfony 3.4 now, I believe. And that's going to become unsupported November 2021. With Ceditor 4, it's going to be unsupported in 2023. With Twig 1, we don't know when it's going to be unsupported. They don't tell us when it's going to be unsupported, but we think that it's going to be unsupported in a few years because they've been hitting some release problems with Twig 1 that they will probably want to get rid of. And jQuery is not yet unsupported, but jQuery UI is unmaintained and may have security issues later on if we don't move from jQuery UI. So we need to consider all of our dependencies. These are some of our dependencies, and keep them up to date. And when we update dependencies, most of the dependencies, we expose their APIs as part of the Drupal API. We don't have abstraction layers on top of Symfony and jQuery and Ceditor and Twig to the extent that we could just update them in the background without needing to release a new major version of Drupal core. Because if we change the APIs of Drupal, we need to release a new major version of Drupal. So Symfony is basically dictating our release schedule for Drupal 9. So as you can see, Symfony 3 goes end of life in November 2021. So that means that unless we fork Symfony 3 and we maintain Symfony 3 for ourselves, Drupal Symfony 3, then we need to move on to Symfony 4 or 5, and we need to stop supporting Drupal 8 because it's built on Symfony 3 in November 2021. So consequently, this means that Drupal 8 security and bug fix support can only continue until that time, and that's going to be the Drupal 8 end of life in November 2021. And so we need to update to a newer version of Symfony or something else, but something else would be a lot more work than keeping up with Symfony, and we like Symfony, so we don't have any problems with Symfony per se. A lot of these practices we learned from Symfony, in fact. So what we plan to do is we release Drupal 9 next summer, less than a year from now, June 3rd, 2020, to give enough time to update from Drupal 8 to Drupal 9. So what we plan to do on June 3rd, 2020, is to release the last minor version of Drupal 8, 8.9, and the first minor version of Drupal 9, 9.0, on the same day, both releases. And that's where Drupal 9 support is going to start. So we will support Drupal 8 and 9 at the same time for a year and a half, overlapping support for the two for a year and a half. There are some other dependencies that we should consider, but they are not forcing us to release sooner than this time frame. And we believe that we can go on for a bit with Drupal 9 before we hit deadlines with other dependencies. So this is our plan. So after 8.8, which is released this December, our plan is to release Drupal 8.9 and Drupal 9.0 on the same day, June 3rd, 2020. And then continue working on 9 into 9.1, 9.2, etc. We will not release further minor versions of Drupal 8. We will support Drupal 8.9 with security and bug fixes for a year and a half onwards. If there is a chance that we cannot make next summer's timeline with Drupal 9, the fallback date for 9.0 is Drupal 8.10, is basically next December. Is the last date that we believe that we need to release Drupal 9 to have at least 1 year to update to Drupal 9 for our users. And so, okay, so this is what dictates Drupal 9. So then the question is, what happens to Drupal 10? So this is a crystal ball answer. We don't know. The Drupal 10 release is estimated to be the middle of 2022, with Drupal 9 support estimated to end of 2023. Once again, these are not guaranteed. Anybody take photographs? I think I have enough visuals to identify that these are not to be taken, trusted, set in stone numbers at this time. This would be mainly driven based on whether we succeed with updating to Symfony 5 in Drupal 9, and also practically based on the CK Editor 4 timeline. They want to end support for CK Editor 4 before the end of 2023. So we will need to move on to CK Editor 5 in Drupal 10. We will not move on to CK Editor 5 in Drupal 9, but we will need to very likely move on to CK Editor 5 in Drupal 10. All right, so how do we make this happen? How do we release Drupal 8.9 and 9.0 on the same day, June 3, 2020, if all goes well? So far, it seems like all will go well. Because previously, what we've done is we've had Drupal 7 going on for a while, and at one point, we decided to, okay, we start working on Drupal 8 now. We created a branch, and we went crazy on the branch. And we went way off 2 mountains outside, and we went all crazy about refactoring everything. Switched from procedural programming to OOP, and then reworked all of our data APIs and introduced a new routing system and a new templating system and a new everything. Even changed info files to info YAML files. So basically, a Drupal 7 module does not have a lot of resemblance to a Drupal 8 module anymore. And the problem with this, so what's great about this is we could innovate whatever we want. The problem with this is we never knew when it's going to end. We kept refactoring, and we kept finding problems, and then we kept refactoring. And then whatever you worked on at the start when it was branched may be released 3 years later, 4 years later. And by that time, it may be outdated already. The incentives were not there for people to contribute. Even for those who felt like they like to contribute to core, they didn't know when their work is going to be released. It was very painful. And for users, they didn't know when Drupal 8 is going to land. They got a release that was far ahead from Drupal 7. That was a pain to move to, etc. So it was both a pain for users and both a pain for developers. So obviously, we didn't want to repeat that. So what we are doing with 9 is we derived that from the previous major version. We built Drupal 9 in Drupal 8. So if you keep up to date with Drupal 8 today, then you're gradually updating to Drupal 9, release by release. So we are building Drupal 9 in Drupal 8, not in a separate code base. So the way we do this is the fourth practice that we've introduced is the deprecation processes. So what we do is we add new code into Drupal 8 that we think we want to have in Drupal 9. And in case new code is a replacement for something old, then we keep the old code and we mark the old code for removal in Drupal 9. And we implement the old code with the new APIs inside in a backwards compatible manner. So we add the new things into Drupal 8. We keep the old things around. So we keep backwards compatibility, but we also gradually add Drupal 9 into Drupal 8. That's what we do. So let's see how that looks like. So here's Drupal 7's API in a schematic. There's boxes. We add a new API that we think is going to be great. And we identify this as a replacement for an old API that we mark deprecated is to be removed. And then we keep doing this for further releases. And then we will end up with more new solutions and more deprecated things that are going to be removed in the future. And we still keep backwards compatibility. We keep all the old things around. They still work. They are still tested. And we keep the old third-party dependencies around as well. And what Drupal 9 does from Drupal 8.9 is this. We remove everything that was deprecated, and we update the third-party dependencies. So all of Drupal 9 was already in Drupal 8 with all the new solutions that we've already added, except the updates of third-party dependencies. So we build Drupal 9 in Drupal 8. If you keep updated with Drupal 8, you are already using part of Drupal 9. Mostly, you're using Drupal 9 already. So that means that the Drupal 9 API is basically the Drupal 8.9 API minus the deprecated parts and plus the third-party dependencies updated. We will open a branch of Drupal 9 for the sake of updating the third-party dependencies so people can test their modules with Drupal 9. But Drupal 9 is going to be the same as the last release of Drupal 8 minus deprecated parts plus third-party dependencies. So that also means that Drupal 8 modules should work with Drupal 9 as long as they are not using any of the removed things, any of the deprecated APIs. All right? So once again, we are building Drupal 9 in Drupal 8 step by step. If you are keeping up to date with Drupal 8, then you are adopting Drupal 9. Easy. So how can you prepare for Drupal 9? The first thing is you keep Drupal core and all the contributed modules up to date. Drupal core keeps removing its own uses of deprecated APIs. And the contributed modules also keep removing their uses of course deprecated APIs. So basically, if you keep all the modules up to date, then you are gradually moving to Drupal 9. You can't even avoid that. How do we do this in terms of code? Here's an example. So in Drupal 8, that's very, very black. But in Drupal 8, we have file and managed copy. Is a function that copies a file from a source to a destination. And what we did in 8.7 is we've introduced a service, the file system service that now has a method that says copy and copies the file from a source to a destination. And so this is a replacement in 8.7. Why is this better? Is this better because it's a service that people can replace and inject? It's better because it's a service that people can instrument. It's a service that people can mock for testing. It's a service that has an interface that you can review all the methods that belong to handling files. So it's easy to see all the methods that belong together. It's better because it's the way Drupal 8 does things. So if you do things elsewhere in Drupal core, this is the style of API you expect. It's better because the code is not loaded all the time. It's only loaded if you need it. So it's better for all kinds of reasons. Obviously, if you remove this one line with this one line, it's very marginally better. It's not really better because you are still using a global service with a method. So actually, you should inject this service into your controller or whatever you want to use this, and use this in a dependency injection fashion. And then you could inject the dependency separately, or they can swap that dependency with third-party code, etc., as they wish. And then that's actually better. But this would be a much longer code example, so I did not take that. So this is how we do this in terms of code. I'm sorry for it being not ideally lighted. So we have the file unmanaged copy function around, and we add two things to the function. We add a deprecated annotation, and we add the trigger error call to the function. So we keep the API around in a backwards compatible way. People can still use file unmanaged copy the way they used before. It still works. What we do is we basically add two markers that say this is going to be removed. Please don't use this anymore. And we explain in the documentation that we're going to remove it in Drupal 9 and use this file system interface copy instead. And we do the same in the trigger error call. And we use these two things so that static code analyzers and IDEs can mark your deprecated API. And when you run tests, they can also find the deprecated API use. And there's tools to find these. There's Drupal check. That's a very easy tool to use. So you can basically download it directly from GitHub. The layer is Drupal check. And then you can run it. In this case, I'm running it on the core path module. Because yes, the core path module has deprecated API use still to this day. Yes, we are still working on that. So we're running it in the core path module. It runs. And then it produces you this report. And it says that your core path module uses these deprecated APIs. Please remove them. This path test base extends the rep test base, and it will be removed in Drupal 9. And the lookup destination ID in the migration map migrate ID map interface will be removed in Drupal 9 as well. And so this tells us what we should use instead, and these are the code paths that will be removed. So we can do this now. Drupal 8.1 has been quite a while ago, so we can already remove this, and we need to wait a bit for this one, but it's going to be fine to act on. So this is a tool that allows you to find all the deprecated API use in your code. And once you remove all of these usages of deprecated APIs, then your code is as Drupal 9 compatible today as you can be, because you're not using any of the deprecated APIs anymore. We've also built a very fancy UI tool on top of this that's called Upgrade Status. So if you install the Drupal 8 version of Upgrade Status, this is how it looks like. It has the UI, and then you can run it on all of your modules or a subset of your modules, and then it tells you how many modules it checked and found Drupal 9 compatible as much as possible right now, how many warnings and errors it found, and basically gets you an executive level report on your status of Drupal 9 compatibility. So it's very easy to see what you need to do to be Drupal 9 compatible. And if you go into any specific project, then it tells you the same report that you've seen on the command line on the two screenshots before. It tells you that this is what I found. You are using this API. Please don't use this. Use the other API instead. And then you can work your way through all of these. It categorizes them based on things that you can fix now or need to fix later based on how Drupal support is lined up. And so it identifies all the things that you can fix now, and then you can remove all of those used APIs. This is a fancy UI that you can use to find all the problems and even export the report and send to your manager. And I'm this Drupal 9 compatible in this project. And then, if you own a project on Drupal.org, there's even more tools to check for deprecated API use. So Drupal.org has a CI system, a continuous integration system you can use to run code analysis and tests on your projects. So here I am using both tools on Drupal.org to test my project for deprecation errors. The first is the same Drupal check upgrade status tool that checks for deprecated API use with static analysis. And the other one is making my tests fail if a trigger error call is encountered as part of running the tests. So there's a way to do the static analysis of your code all on Drupal.org, and there's a way to fail your tests if your tested code uses deprecated APIs. So it's basically a surefire way to find all of the problems with your code with Drupal 9 compatibility. And then Pronovix, you can talk to them outside here. Deja Bitso at Pronovix built a tool that actually generates you automated patches to fix your Drupal 9 compatibility issues, even better. So you don't even just get the information that you need to fix something, you get a patch. Here's a patch. You're using Drupal set message is the most used deprecated API in Drupal contrib, by the way. And it suggests you to use the messenger service and the add error method and the add warning method for the appropriate cases. So basically generates you a patch that then you need to review and you can apply to your code, and you will get much further ahead in terms of Drupal 9 compatibility. So this is based on Rector. All these tools and links will be in my slides, so don't be afraid that you don't know where you can get this one. It will be in my slides, and you'll have access to my slides after the talk. So now we have all of these tools. Should you run home now, or even go to the workshop room and fix all of your deprecated issues right now? Well, yes, but not all of them. It depends on if you're talking about deprecated API use in custom code or in Drupal.org projects. If it's in custom code, then yes, please go to the workshop room and fix it now. You can do it as fast as possible based on the Drupal version that you're running with. Obviously, we've shown that the tool reports problems with deprecated APIs in Drupal 8.8. Drupal 8.8 is not even released yet. So since you are not using Drupal 8.8, you are likely unable to execute on this deprecation. You are probably not yet capable of removing the use of that API. But all the APIs that you can actually remove, you should remove the use of. If you are a contributed project on Drupal.org, there is one catch. Drupal core releases are supported for 12 months. So right now, Drupal 8.7 is supported and 8.6 is supported. So if there's deprecated code that was deprecated in 8.6 and there was only replacements in 8.6, you probably don't want to remove the use of that yet, because that would also mean that your module is not supporting 8.6 anymore. That could be painful for your users, because if they are using 8.6, it's a supported core release, and there may be a critical bug fix or a security issue for your module, which I know is not going to happen, but maybe. Let's imagine. Then they will be forced to update Drupal core to 8.7 if you are using APIs that are only available in 8.7. All right? So you probably want to support 8.6 right now. So any deprecated APIs that have been reported by the tools for 8.7 and 8.8, you don't want to act them on yet. But for 8.6 deprecations, you can already remove. I tested 2 days ago, I looked at the data about all of the Drupal.org contributed modules, and 76% of their uses of deprecated APIs have been in Drupal core releases that are already unsupported. So 3/4 of the deprecated API use in contrib can already be fixed today. So if you have a contributed module, there's high likeliness that there's deprecated errors there that you can fix right now. If you want to involve other people to work with your project to get to Drupal 9, or you are annoyed by contributors submitting random issues in your project, fixing all kinds of deprecated issues that you don't want to fix yet, then this is for you. So Drupal.org introduced a feature that's called Drupal 9 plan. And Drupal.org project maintainers can specify a Drupal 9 plan as part of their project. In this case, this is upgrade status. So you can fill in this line yourself. And I fill this like this, so see this issue to contribute to making this module Drupal 9 compatible. Some projects said that I'm already Drupal 9 compatible, yay. Some projects said that I'm conservative with which core modules I support. Some projects may say, send me money and I will work on Drupal 9. Some project may say, I'm abandoned, move over to this other project. So this is basically for module maintainers to tell you how to engage with them, or if you are a module maintainer, to tell everybody else how to engage with you. So you get the best contribution from everybody. And you're not annoyed by people submitting issues in random places. They will submit an issue as part of that meta issue, etc. That's the idea. So you should look at the project page for a module if you want to submit them an issue about Drupal 9 and see how they want to engage with the community in terms of Drupal 9 process. The next question is, when do we know all the deprecated things? Okay, we are deprecating, it's great. But when do we know all the deprecated things? When do we know what the Drupal 9 API is going to look like, basically? So the answer to that is we decided that Drupal 8.8 is going to be the last version to deprecate for Drupal 9. So this December, when Drupal 8.8 comes out, then we will have a release that has all of the deprecations for Drupal 9. So the Drupal 9 API essentially will be defined, other than maybe some third-party dependency updates that we did not foresee. We also hope to be complete with the third-party dependency updates by December. And December is the release date for 8.8, but technically the week of October 14th is the alpha release for 8.8. So the week of October 14th is when we plan to have the Drupal 9 API defined, which is about 8 months ahead of the Drupal 9 release. So there's going to be 8 months for contributed modules to update to the Drupal 9 release. So okay, some modules already updated to Drupal 9 as we know it today, and they don't have any deprecated API use. So should they create a Drupal 9 branch and say that, yay, I'm ready for Drupal 9? Should they create a Drupal 9 branch? No. If you have a contributed module on Drupal.org or know a contributed module on Drupal.org that is as ready for Drupal 9 as it can be, please do not create a Drupal 9 branch. Because what we plan to do with Drupal 9 is, because it's essentially the same as Drupal 8, the last release of Drupal 8, other than deprecated APIs removed, is considering that modules keeping up to date with Drupal 8 deprecations will be able to run on both Drupal 8 and 9 without having a separate branch. What we plan to do with Drupal 9 is to allow you to change your info file and say that, by the way, I'm also compatible with Drupal 9. And so you don't need to create a new branch. You don't need to maintain 2 separate branches. And you can keep support for the same code base and have less to worry about when Drupal 9 comes out, because your Drupal 8 code already removed all the deprecated API use, and it's both compatible with Drupal 8 for the year and a half that it's still going to be supported, and Drupal 9 because you are not using deprecated APIs anymore. So there's no reason to create a Drupal 9 branch. In fact, it will be more confusing than not creating one. So the default way of having Drupal 9 modules is not going to be creating Drupal 9 branches. What exactly is going to be the way is still defined in this issue. So if you are interested in the exact details, we don't have the 100% answer yet as to what the way is going to be, but we'll define that by the middle of October latest. Just don't create a 9 branch yet. The final question is, will contributed modules be compatible? Because for Drupal 8, some of them are still not compatible. So will they be compatible with Drupal 9? And there's some good news, because in this year, March, Dwayne McDaniel ran some testing of contributed modules, and he found some nice answers. So this March, 48% of the contributed modules were already Drupal 9 compatible to the extent of Drupal 9 defined in March this year. So they did not have any deprecated API use. And 35% had 1 to 5 deprecated API use that are mostly easy to remove, like Drupal set message is the most common, as I've said, is 3/4 of all the deprecated API uses. So this is pretty promising. But this was in March. So, of course, Drupal core keeps introducing new deprecated APIs, so you would expect that this is going to get worse in the future. However, it's actually get much better since March. So this is data from 2 days ago, running with Drupal 8.8 with all of the deprecations defined to date. 54% of the contributed modules are 2 days ago Drupal 9 compatible, as much as we know Drupal 9's API at this time, which is huge. There's never been the Drupal core release where more than half of the modules are already compatible 1 year before the release even happens. I think it's like, I don't know. So if we can succeed in moving the rest forward, then this is going to be really exciting for us. So as Dries said in his blog post, the big deal about Drupal 9 is, for users at least, is that it should not be a big deal. It should be an easy move. So the contributed modules are moving far ahead. Core is moving. 8.7 was mostly Symfony 4 compatible already. So we pretty much know that we can move to Symfony 4 any day if we need to. So we are gearing up quite nicely to release June 3rd, 2020 of 9.0. But how many of you use Drupal 7? Yes. Several people use Drupal 7, about half of the audience, yes. So yes, that's a case that we cannot ignore. Because if you look at the usage stats for Drupal core, about 70%, 70% of Drupal users use Drupal 7. And as I said, the Drupal 8 upgrade path should be easy. As part of the reason that we focus so much on making it easy is because the Drupal 7 to 8 upgrade path is so hard. So historically, what we would have done is we would stop Drupal 7 support on the day of the next release, Drupal 9. So it would be next summer, Drupal 7 would be over, bye-bye. That's not what we are planning to do right now. It would be so sad to 70% of our user base. It would be very sad. So what we decided to do is we extend Drupal 7 support into the end of Drupal 8 support to November 2021. So if you look carefully, it will support 3 major versions of Drupal core at once for a year and a half. It's going to be fun, especially for core developers, for some definition of fun. And we'll have community support for Drupal 7 until that date. If you still need Drupal 7 support after that, then we'll have commercial support by vendors. After that, at least until 2024. So you can sign up with vendors the same terms as, similar terms as Drupal 6 extended support that is still available today. So you could sign up with vendors to extend your support up until way in the future in 2024. So I think that takes care of at least the big sites, and we are trying to take care of people who will maybe not be able to afford that in a different way. So let's talk first about why you should actually update to Drupal 8. I think it's a very exciting release. So we have a bunch of exciting new features in Drupal 8 compared to Drupal 7. It's been so long ago that it's hard to even understand when you've been in Drupal 8 for long. But we have Layout Builder, which is a much better way to build layouts than Panels ever was. The multilingual capabilities, as the former multilingual initiative lead, I may be able to brag about that, are worlds apart from Drupal 7. BigPipe makes your sites much faster with anonymous and authenticated traffic separated. There's content moderation built in with a lot more things to be able to moderate in Drupal 8. We have REST API and JSON API in Drupal 8. We have configuration management that makes it easy to deploy changes. We have better media handling, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, really. There's a lot of better things in Drupal 8 compared to Drupal 7. So if you need to move from Drupal 7, there's basically 3 things you need to consider, and neither of them will be easy. All of them will have challenges. But if you have, obviously you have contributed modules, you should look at the upgrade status module, the Drupal 7 version, to estimate your upgradability. For all of your custom code, you should use the Drupal module upgrader, which generates you patches for your custom code to update to Drupal 8 and consequently Drupal 9. And for all of your content, use the migrate modules in Drupal core. As I said, all of these have problems. The module upgrader will not generate 100% Drupal 8 code. The contributed modules are not 100% updated. The migration tool suite needs a lot of improvements, especially in terms of dry running, in terms of finding the errors that you're going to encounter before you encounter them. So we are committed to looking at improvements in all of these areas in time for Drupal 9's release. It's going to be hopefully improved. I'm working with Vicky in New Zealand. Yes, I'm working with Vicky in New Zealand to make the multilingual migration path stable, for example, for 8.8. So there's a bunch of improvements on the way here, but we have tools to make the Drupal 7 upgrade easy. And as I said, once you are on Drupal 8, it's a much easier life because most of the contributed, or more than half of the contributed modules are already Drupal 9 ready in Drupal 8 as of 2 days ago in the latest version of Drupal core. I think skipping Drupal 8 does not actually bring benefits. I think historically people have been thinking about skipping major versions and just getting one version ahead because the upgrade is painful anyway. In this case, Drupal 9 is basically the same as Drupal 8 other than the deprecated API is removed. So what you're getting with trying to skip Drupal 8 is you get less time to update to Drupal 9. You only have the year and a half unless you sign up with a vendor to give more security support. So you get less time to execute your migrations, less time to figure out all the problems. And you're effectively updating to a similar code base that is Drupal 8. Just will have more pressure. So instead of skipping that, I suggest you start looking as soon as possible. In your upgrade process, you should use Drupal check. That helps you write your new code in a way that's already Drupal 9 compatible. So all the custom code that you are writing will be Drupal 9 compatible already. And you don't need to worry about your custom code for Drupal 9. And as you've seen, the contributed modules are already moving and not even too slow towards Drupal 9. So let's recap the key points. Drupal innovation does not actually happen with Drupal 9. The big innovation in Drupal 9 is the easy upgrade path. That's the shiny feature of Drupal 9. There's no other shiny features. So the innovation actually happens twice a year in minor releases, and that will continue to happen in Drupal 9. Drupal 9 is built in Drupal 8 step by step. So if you're keeping up to date with Drupal 8, you're already adopting Drupal 9. You can't avoid adopting Drupal 9. All the code that we are building for Drupal 9 is already in Drupal 8, is beta tested. You're already using that code that is going to be in Drupal 9. It's not a separate new code base that you would need to be afraid of. If you keep up with these updates, then you're essentially updating to Drupal 9. If you're using Drupal 7, I don't think there's a reason to wait for Drupal 9 really, because you just lose time. If you do need to keep your Drupal 7 side there, then vendors are going to provide extended security support similar to Drupal 6. So these slides, you can find them at bit.ly/state of Drupal 9. And there's a lot more documentation, a lot more intricate details about PHP version requirements and all kinds of other things at drupal.org/docs/9. These are the credits, and thank you. And I will take questions from here.
Can you please answer the question about the jQuery, like in one question? And there is a question, should we go with Drupal now?
All right. So, do you plan on deprecating jQuery as a dependency? Personally, I think it's too bloated. And same could be accomplished with more smaller libraries. Yeah, so we are looking at jQuery and jQuery UI. And the situation is the following. jQuery UI is practically abandoned at this point. There's not been many commits to it in the past few years. So we are concerned, and jQuery is being developed for a later version, and we are concerned that there's going to be a new release of jQuery, and there's not going to be a new release of jQuery UI. So our jQuery UI version will be outdated and will not be able to update to the later version of jQuery. And we may be in a bind to be an unsupported state with jQuery and jQuery UI. So what we're looking at right now is replacing jQuery UI or parts of jQuery UI with other libraries. And that's hard because we use a lot of jQuery UI also. Dialog and draggable, sortable, and autocomplete, and a bunch of other things we use from jQuery UI. So a team of several people have been very actively looking at how to replace some of that. I don't have the definite answers yet. But we are trying to replace some of those things, so eventually we can maybe get rid of jQuery as well. But we will not get rid of jQuery before Drupal 9 is released. We may get rid of jQuery for Drupal 10, but that's a bit farther out to be able to tell. I don't know. But yes, ideally we would have a more lean JavaScript. There's also basically a problem of Drupal not having enough JavaScript developers in core. So the more we can have, the more free we can go with our own APIs. So we are somewhat reluctant to build our own JavaScript APIs because we know we don't have a lot of people to maintain them. And the other question that I've been asked to ask is, should we go with Drupal 9.0 or wait for a more stable version? I guess that means 9.1 or 9.2 when it gets more tested. So one thing that I've said is all the APIs that we are adding for ourselves for 9.0 are already going to be in Drupal 8. So if you keep using Drupal 8, you are basically keep using the same APIs that are in 9. So the only potential difference that there could be is the third-party dependencies. And so far, we haven't found major problems with updating to them in core. But obviously, there's a lot of creative uses of Symfony components and Twig components and Twig APIs in Contrib. So it's very hard to predict how that's going to pan out. That's why we've already built optional Twig support in 8.7. And we have almost full Symfony 4 support in 8.7. So that we can open the 9 branch as soon as possible. And then we can set contributed modules tests to test against the new branch. So as long as they remove the deprecated API uses, they can test with the new dependencies as well and then see if there is any big problems with dependency use. We cannot tell that part yet, so we can only test with our own deprecation updates with these tools that we have so far. So as soon as we can branch Drupal 9, then we'll have more information with the branches, and that will help answer this question. I don't know. There will be a 1.5 year support overlapping with Drupal 7, 8, and 9. So you will have some time to wait around if you believe you want to wait around and not be an early adopter. There's always an option for that. But I would love to have more early adopters as well in the camp. That's it. I will be around all day today and some of the day tomorrow. So I'm happy to have more discussions. I see there's more questions that we don't have time anymore. Thank you.